Hi, my name is Marzo. I'm an English teacher. As a teacher, I get asked a lot of questions from my students. But there's this one question that students usually ask me a lot, and that'd be, Marzo, how did you learn English? And that's a very natural question for them to ask me because, actually they know that I've never lived abroad. I learned English 100% in Brazil. I became a teacher and everything. So I decided to put this video together to talk about this. Detalhe, o vídeo está feito em inglês, só que ele também tem legendas, tanto em inglês quanto em português disponíveis. É só escolher no menu. Caso você esteja assistindo esse vídeo no celular, o menu está em cima, são 3 pontinhos. Caso esteja assistindo no computador, o menu é embaixo, nessa barrinha que tem abaixo. É só escolher, tem uma engrenagemzinha, só escolher qual é o idioma de preferência para ver as legendas. Ok? Like I said, I'm doing this video to share my experience on how I learned English, how I taught myself English, but before I start talking about how I did it and what I did, I want to give you some background on when it all started. The year was 1999, and it was my last year in the Army. I was 22 years old. And, I remember that I was living on a tight budget, I didn't have money. I didn't have money to pay for a regular English school, and I didn't have money to pay for a private English tutor or anything like that. So, but I did have strong will, and I really wanted to become fluent, and I really wanted to learn the language. The question was, how can I achieve my goals of becoming fluent in English on a very low budget? I made a very important decision at the time because, I was just looking at what I didn't have. And instead, I decided to look at what I did have. And what I had at the time, it was, basically what I had at the time was the willpower I previously mentioned. I didn't have anything else, but I also needed some material to study, and that I could afford. So I decided to buy a correspondence course. Okay, and remember, 1999, everything was different at the time. Internet was just, I didn't have access to internet. It was available, it was out there. A lot of people had access to internet, basically in other countries, not in Brazil. In the United States, Canada, in Europe, it was pretty popular, but in Brazil, it was kind of popular, but nothing like nowadays, okay? So basically I bought this box full of books, full of material, and then I have material now. I have the willpower, I have the material to study. Still, it was just the beginning of the journey. I remember when I first got the material at home, I was so excited, I just basically got the material, started to use it right away. I learned to use it, and I used it every day. And I did everything I was supposed to be doing and some more. I remember that, one thing is for sure, one thing is very important to mention here. I was not studying at a regular English course, I didn't have anybody to practice. You see, I didn't have anybody to interact in English. I couldn't practice basically speaking. So it was a very silent period for me. It was a very silent 2 years of basically silence, from me. But it was not total silence because, I did a lot of dictation and a lot of shadowing, and I recorded myself reading the text too, and I compared to the original files. And, as I compared, I could correct myself, you see. It was some kind of a self-assessment, you see. It was really, really good, That's actually something that I recommend. And it was basically that, you see. And shadowing is a very interesting technique. It's very similar to recording yourself, but instead of recording yourself, you basically, when you're watching a movie, when I was watching a movie, for example, I was basically saying everything that the actors were saying simultaneously. As soon as they said whatever they were saying in their script, I said, a few seconds later, You see, it's very interesting because it doesn't help you that much with pronunciation, but it helps you a lot with the intonation and other aspects of, speech. It was nice. 2 years talking to no one in English, and 2 years without any, interaction with anybody in English. It sounds boring, right? You might be thinking, how can I study English without talking to anyone? Not possible. Well, nowadays, you don't need that. Okay, you can practice. Since the very first day, even if you teach yourself English. Nowadays there are lots of tools that you can use where you can practice with native speakers. But like I said, at the time it was not available. It was very different than nowadays. So I remember very well the first time that I got in touch and that I finally had the opportunity to talk to somebody in English, you see. And not only was somebody to talk to, it was a native speaker of English. I remember I was walking down the street with my wife, and I saw this little house, and there was this saying, "English classes for free." And I was like, "English classes for free? Okay." I got into the house, you see, the little house. It was a church. I didn't know. There was no cross in front of it. It didn't really look like a church, but it was. And there was this young man with a name tag on his chest, and he was a Mormon, and it was a Mormon church. And I started talking to him. There was not right away because there was a class, an English lesson going on, and then I noticed it was a class for beginners, but I also noticed that most of his talk was in Portuguese, but he had this accent, and I was like, okay, I think this guy is a native speaker of English. Maybe he's an American. I'll wait here and I'll talk to him later. And that's what I did. I talked to him. We kind of became friends. He went to my house. We talked a lot, and that was my first time that I talked to a native speaker in my life. It was very good. And then I remember he told me about another church, which was a bigger one, and there they had more and better organized lessons, divided into levels, you see. And I remember I went, and I got into the advanced level right away. I could not understand much. See, I remember that in each room there were 2 different teachers, and I remember that there were these 2 Americans talking to a group of people, and all of them were better than me. All of them could understand everything they were saying. I noticed something, and here's what I noticed. I couldn't understand very much, okay? Even though I was using a lot of good material, it was somewhat artificial. You see, it was not natural English, you see. So I noticed that I needed to practice more listening than I was doing. Yes, even though I had been practicing listening for over 2 years, it was not enough because I was not listening to the right material. I needed something more natural, more native, you see. And I had that, with the native speakers, but they were not always available to me. I couldn't go. They provided classes, I think, like twice a week or something like that, 1 or 2 hours. I don't remember exactly, but it was a long time ago. And but basically, I decided that I would be watching a lot more movies, American movies. So this is when I locked myself in the basement and watched all the American movies. Just kidding, you see. But yes, I think that everybody needs to watch real English materials, okay? This is when your English start to get to another level, I started to study English in 1999. I was 22 years old. I had my first contact with a native speaker 2 years later. For 2 years, I had no chance. I had no interaction with anyone in English. So my practice was just using basically books and stuff like that, the material that I bought. And basically, I became a teacher in 2002. I didn't mention that, but that's another video, you know, that's something for another video. And I'm going to tell you the story of how I became an English teacher later, you know, in another video. That's one of the videos that I intend to do. So basically, if you think you can benefit from this video, or if you think that somebody else that you know can benefit from it, you know, maybe you can get inspired, or, you know, maybe you think that this video is going to help you or a friend of yours, feel free to share it. Feel free to comment. You know, if you want to ask me a question, you know, just ask. You see, there's a comment section down below in YouTube. Just go ahead and ask me whatever question you want, okay? And thanks a lot for watching the video. I'll see you soon.